You mentioned the Torah, and people often think of these ancient scrolls maybe in a synagogue.
Right, that's the common image.
But here's something that, well, it might surprise some folks.
Yeah.
It's also known by another name, Pentateuch. Kind of rings a bell, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Pentateuch, 5 books.
5 books, yeah. One incredibly influential text. It really makes you wonder what's actually inside and why it's stuck around for so long.
And what's fascinating, really, right from the start, is that even a question that seems simple, like, who wrote these 5 books? Well, that's been a source of debate and different understandings for centuries.
Yeah.
It really hints at the depth and complexity we're about to get into.
Absolutely. And that exploration, that's exactly what we're doing today. We heard from you, our listeners, that you wanted to get a solid handle on the Torah, its main ideas, why it's important, and maybe some of the different ways people approach it.
Mm-hmm.
So we've pulled together some key resources to help us out. We've got the Wikipedia pages for Torah and Torah Scroll, an article from the Society for Humanistic Judaism called Torah as Myth, The Two Great Mistakes, and also a piece from Ashish.com, Torah versus Talmud.
So our goal here is really to pull out the most important pieces from these sources, give you a clear understanding of the Torah, what's in it, its significance, the various viewpoints around it, but, without getting bogged down in overly academic stuff.
Right, like a shortcut.
Think of it as your express route, to being well-informed.
Okay, so to start then, let's get down to basics. What exactly is the Torah in its, most fundamental sense?
Okay, so at its absolute core, the Torah refers to the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, or what Christians often call the Old Testament.
Genesis, Exodus.
Exactly. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those are the ones, the foundational texts.
Right. Those names are familiar. We mentioned Pentateuch already, but there are other names too, aren't there?
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. If you're reading scholarly work or maybe texts from Hellenistic Judaism, especially from ancient Alexandria, you'll often see Pentateuch, which, like we said, is Greek for 5 scrolls.
Mm-hmm.
Then within Jewish tradition itself, partly because of the, long-held belief about who wrote it, it's very commonly called the 5 books of Moses.
Yeah.
And importantly, in Rabbinic Judaism, it carries the title, the written Torah. That distinction becomes really key when we start talking about the oral Torah later on.
So all these different terms, Pentateuch, 5 books of Moses, written Torah, they're essentially pointing to the same 5 books.
Pretty much, yeah.
But the actual form it takes can be quite different, like physically.
Precisely. For liturgical use, in synagogue services, the Torah exists as a Sefer Torah. That's a meticulously handwritten scroll. It holds immense sacred value. We'll definitely get into how those are made later. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
But when you find those same 5 books in, say, a bound book format, maybe with rabbinic commentaries or translations included, that's usually called a chumash.
Ah, okay. Chumash, like the script versus maybe a published version with notes.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
Now, I've also sort of heard that the term Torah can sometimes mean something even broader.
Yes, and that's a really crucial point. In rabbinic thinking, Torah isn't always strictly limited to just these 5 books. It can expand to include the oral Torah.
Right, you mentioned that.
Which is this whole body of interpretations, traditions, laws believed to have been given alongside the written text, passed down orally for generations. And sometimes, honestly, the term Torah is even used as a shorthand for the entire Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh.
Wow.
So the context is really, really key when you hear the word Torah.
That makes sense. Okay, that gives us a really solid foundation on what the Torah is. Now, what about what's in it? What kind of stories, what teachings do we actually find in these 5 books? What's the, overarching story?
Well, think of it as the foundational narrative. It's the story of the people of Israel and their relationship with God. It starts big, with the creation of the world in Genesis.
Right, the very beginning.
Then it traces the early history of humanity, the emergence of the Israelites, their descent into Egypt, the whole period of slavery.
And then the Exodus.
Exactly. The pivotal moment of the Exodus liberation, divine intervention, Moses leading them out. Then, crucially, the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. That's the core of the covenant.
Okay.
The narrative follows their journey through the wilderness and then concludes with Moses' death right as they're about to enter the promised land, Canaan.
So it's a huge sweep of history. But it's not just history, is it? It's packed with laws and instructions.
Absolutely not just history. Woven right into this narrative are religious obligations, moral teachings, civil laws. Some are super explicit, like the Ten Commandments, everyone knows those.
Mhm.
But others are kind of embedded in the stories themselves. They illustrate principles, set precedents. Think about the laws around Passover that come right out of the Exodus story.
Got it. Okay, let's maybe take a quick tour book by book just to get the main themes. Genesis first. What's the core there?
Genesis really sets the whole stage. You can kind of think of it in two main parts: primeval history and then ancestral history.
Primeval, like
Ugh.
creation, the flood.
Exactly. Creation, Adam and Eve, the flood, Noah's covenant. These big cosmic stories establishing the relationship between God and humanity.
And then it zooms in.
Then it zooms in. The ancestral history picks up with Abraham's journey. That's the start of God's specific covenant with him and his descendants. We follow the line through Isaac, then Jacob, who gets renamed Israel.
Hence the Israelites.
Precisely. And the book finishes with the story of Joseph, explaining how the Israelites end up in Egypt, which perfectly sets up Exodus. A key theme throughout Genesis is how God's covenants develop, starting broad and getting focused on this one family.
Okay, Genesis lays the groundwork. Then Exodus. That's the big escape story, right?
You got it. Exodus is all about liberation, that miraculous escape from Egypt, the plagues, God's power on display. Moses really steps up as the leader, guiding them out, taking them towards Mount Sinai. And Sinai is huge because that's where God makes this formal covenant with the whole nation.
Promising them the land.
Promising them Canaan, the promised land, yeah. In return for their loyalty, following his laws, they get the 10 Commandments there, other laws, and crucially, instructions for building the tabernacle.
The portable sanctuary.
Right, a place for God's presence to dwell among them. The Exodus itself becomes this defining story of redemption in Jewish tradition.
So Exodus, freedom, covenant, then comes Leviticus. That one always struck me as very, well, rule-heavy, ritualistic.
That's a very accurate take. Leviticus is largely about the practicalities. How do the Israelites interact with the holy God now that he's, dwelling right there with them in the tabernacle?
So lots of instructions.
Tons. Detailed instructions on sacrifices, offerings, priestly duties, extensive rules about ritual purity, clean and unclean. That includes the dietary laws, kashrut, identifying permitted animals. We also get the detailed procedures for the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, in Leviticus. And this collection of laws, often called the Holiness Code, emphasizing being holy like God.
And consequences.
Oh, yes. Blessings for obedience, curses for disobedience. Very clear link. And it centers worship on the tabernacle, though that shifts later, of course, with the temple in Jerusalem.
Okay, lots of specifics in Leviticus. What about numbers? The name refers to counting people, right?
Correct. It gets its name from the 2 censuses of the Israelites recorded in it, but the book covers way more than just counting. It picks up where Exodus and Leviticus leave off, Israelites at Sinai with the law.
Right.
Numbers then chronicles their journey towards Canaan. But it's not smooth sailing.
No.
Not at all. It's marked by lots of murmuring, complaining, basically. Lack of faith in God's promises. And this lack of trust leads to God saying, okay, this generation that left Egypt, they're not going in. They'll die in the wilderness.
Wow. Harsh.
It recounts the story of the spies checking out Canaan and the people refusing to go in because they were scared. So Numbers is really about God's guidance, but also human failure, the importance of faith. It ends with a new generation, poised in Moab, ready to cross the Jordan with Joshua.
A tough lesson learned, it sounds like.
Okay.
Finally, Deuteronomy. Sounds like Moses' farewell address.
That's a great way to put it. Deuteronomy means second law or repeated law. It's mostly 3 long sermons from Moses. He's in Moab. They're right on the edge of the promised land.
Looking back
over the 40 years, reminding them of God's faithfulness, urging them, really pleading with them to stick to the covenant and observe the laws. He stresses loving God completely to prosper in the land. But importantly, Deuteronomy also offers hope. Even if they mess up, go into exile, repentance can lead to restoration, return.
And at the very end.
The final chapters have the Song of Moses, his blessing on the tribes, appointing Joshua, and then Moses' death on Mount Nebo. He sees the land, but doesn't enter. Modern scholars, by the way, often see Deuteronomy as reflecting maybe later legal and theological ideas presented as Moses' words.
Fascinating. Okay, that gives us a really helpful map of the 5 books. Now, let's tackle that big question. Who actually wrote all this? Sounds like a major difference between traditional beliefs and modern scholarly views.
Oh, it's absolutely central. Traditionally, within Judaism, especially Orthodox Judaism, the belief is firmly in Mosaic authorship,
Meaning Moses wrote it all.
meaning God dictated or revealed the whole Torah to Moses during those 40 years in the desert, and Moses wrote it down faithfully. The only common exception is the very last bit of Deuteronomy describing Moses' death. That's often attributed to Joshua.
And that's a core belief.
For many, yes, a fundamental article of faith. It underscores the divine origin, the authority of the text.
But modern academics see it differently.
Very differently, yes. The overwhelming consensus among scholars today is that the Torah isn't the work of one person, Moses or anyone else. They see it as a composite text.
Composite, meaning
Meaning it was developed, compiled from multiple sources written over centuries. One really influential theory here is the documentary hypothesis.
Right, I've heard of that. JEPD.
Exactly. Those labels represent what are thought to be four main, originally independent sources. Each has its own style, theology, historical context. Scholars think these were written at different times, maybe late 7th or 6th century BCE down to the 5th century BCE.
And then combine.
And then later combined, edited, woven together by redactors into the single text we have now. Now, the specifics of the documentary hypothesis, still debated, refined, but the general idea that multiple authors, layers compiled over time that's widely accepted academically.
And they think it was mostly finished by the Persian period.
That's the general agreement, yes. Largely complete by then.
And there's even debate about when the laws in the Torah actually became, like, common practice.
Absolutely. There's the traditional view, often linked to Wellhausen, that Torah-based Judaism really solidified around 444 BCE. That's when Ezra reads the Torah publicly, as described in Nehemiah. That was seen as the moment.
But that's being questioned now.
It is. More recent scholars, like Yonatan Adler, look at the archaeological record, other texts, and argue there isn't strong evidence for widespread Torah observance before maybe the mid-2nd century BCE, the Hasmonean period.
This is much later.
Potentially, yes. Adler suggests it emerged later than we thought. Others, like John Collins, propose maybe a middle ground. Perhaps the community in Persian Yehud saw the Torah as having important ancestral laws, started observing some, and then it intensified during the Maccabean revolt.
So the timeline is still kind of fuzzy.
It's definitely an active area of scholarly discussion.
It's really amazing how much ongoing debate surrounds such a foundational text. But okay, regardless of exactly when or how it came together, there's no question the Torah holds immense significance in Judaism, right?
Undeniably central. It's the bedrock, the primary source of revelation for many Jews. It provides the framework for countless rituals, beliefs, ethics that have shaped Jewish life for millennia.
And you see that significance in rituals, like the public Torah reading. Can you tell us about that, Kriyat HaTorah?
Right, Kriyat HaTorah. It's a fundamental communal ritual. It happens regularly, morning services on Mondays, Thursdays, Shabbat, holidays, fast days. You need a minyan, though.
10 adult males, traditionally.
Traditionally, yes. The ceremony itself is quite solemn. Taking the scroll from the Ark, chanting the weekly portion in Hebrew using traditional melodies, cantillation, and then respectfully returning it. It's a very direct, regular connection to the text for the community.
And they read through the whole thing systematically.
Yes, on Shabbat mornings, they read a specific portion, a parasha. The whole Torah is divided up this way, and the cycle is set up to read through the entire Pentateuch over 1 year.
Is that standard everywhere?
The annual cycle, based on a division codified by Maimonides, drawing on the Aleppo Codex, is pretty much universal now. Though, interestingly, some conservative and reform congregations use a triennial cycle reading at about a third each year, taking 3 years to finish.
So different bases.
Different paces, yeah. And there are shorter readings on Shabbat afternoons, Mondays, Thursdays, plus special readings for holidays and other occasions.
So it's not just sitting on a shelf. It's actively used, constantly revisited. And it's also the source of Jewish law, right? The famous 613 commandments.
Exactly. It's packed with legal stuff alongside the stories and ethics. These laws, biblical law, law of Moses, Sinaitic law, cover everything. Rituals, relationships, civil stuff. The specific number 613, that's actually a later rabbinic tradition, an effort to count and categorize all the obligations found within the text.
Okay, now we've talked a lot about the written Torah. But that aegis.com article, Torah versus Talmud, really stresses the oral Torah. What is the oral Torah and how does it connect?
Yeah, the oral Torah concept is absolutely fundamental to rabbinic Judaism. The tradition holds that when Moses got the written Torah at Sinai, He also received an oral Torah
At the same time.
at the same time. A whole body of interpretations, explanations, extra laws, passed down orally, teacher to student, generation after generation, right alongside the written text.
And the Yiddish article says it's essential.
Indispensable, yeah. For properly understanding and applying the written Torah. It fills in the gaps, clarifies things that are ambiguous, gives the actual procedures for commandments that are only mentioned briefly in the written text.
Like the examples they gave, tefillin, phylacteries.
Perfect example. The Torah says, bind God's words as a sign upon your hand. Frontlets between your eyes. Okay, great. But what are tefillin? What are they made of? How exactly do you wear them?
Not in the written Torah.
Nope. Those details come from the oral law. Same with kashrut, the dietary laws. The complex system separating milk and meat. That grows out of just a few lines in the Torah, interpreted through the oral law. Or Shabbat observance, the written text forbids work, mentions severe consequences, but what counts as work. The oral law defines much of that.
So if it was so vital, why wasn't it just written down from the start?
Good question. The classical rabbinic explanation is that keeping it oral was intentional. It fostered a more dynamic relationship with the teachings, discussions, adaptations guided by rabbis. There was also a worry that writing it might freeze it, lead to misinterpretations without the living tradition.
But eventually they did write it down. The Mishnah, the Gemara.
Yes, things changed. Exile, dispersion, persecution. There was a real risk of it being lost. So around 200 CE, Rabbi Judah HaNasi took on this huge task of compiling the Mishnah. That's the first major written collection of the oral law organized by topic.
Okay, so the Mishnah is the first big writing down. What's the Gemara?
So after the Mishnah, over the next few centuries, rabbis in both Israel and Babylonia had extensive discussions about the Mishnah, analyzing it, debating it, expanding on it. Those discussions were eventually compiled into the Gemara. There are actually two, one from Israel, one much larger from Babylonia.
And Mishnah plus Gemara Talmud.
Mishnah plus the Babylonian Gemara equals the Babylonian Talmud. That's the central text. And the oral Torah also includes other stuff like Boratad, Tosefta traditions from the Mishnah era but not in it, and Midrashim, which are rabbinic interpretations, stories, elaborations on the written Torah.
Okay, so Mishnah is the core compilation, Gemara is the commentary and discussion making the Talmud.
You got it. Think of it like layers of tradition building on each other.
And for Orthodox and conservative Judaism, these texts, Mishnah, Talmud, Midrash, they're essential for understanding Jewish law, halakha.
Absolutely essential. They see both written and oral Torah as divinely inspired, equally binding. But Reform and Reconstructionist Judaism see it differently.
Awesome.
They value these texts, for sure, for historical insight, understanding how Jewish thought developed, but they don't necessarily see them as having the same binding authority for determining law today.
And humanistic Judaism, the article mentions them.
They take yet another approach, viewing the Torah primarily as a human, historical, cultural document, not a divinely dictated legal code.
Right. Okay, that leads us neatly into the physical scroll itself, the Sefer Torah.
Mm-hmm.
The Wikipedia entry had so much detail. It sounds like an incredibly precise, almost sacred process to make one.
It absolutely is. They're still handwritten today, meticulously, on parchment jevel or cloth, specific types of processed animal skin.
By special scribes.
By highly skilled, religiously observant scribes called soferim. It's not just a craft, it's a sacred act governed by strict Jewish law, halakha. Every single letter, every little crown or marking is believed to have deep meaning. One mistake can make the whole scroll unfit for ritual use.
And the number of letters is staggering. Over 300,000. Taking like a year and a half to write.
304,805 letters, yeah. It's an incredible feat of dedication. The parchment itself needs special prep soaking, scraping, stretching, treating with salt, flour, this stuff called mafatzim.
Wow.
The ink, too, specific recipe soot, gallnuts, gum, so it's permanent but flexible. The scribe uses a quill, follows straight guidelines they etch or draw, usually 42 lines per column, specific Hebrew calligraphy.
And the rules about mistakes are fascinating. If it's a regular word, maybe you can scrape it off.
Carefully, yes. But if the mistake is in one of God's sacred names, you can't erase or fix it. That whole section of parchment has to be cut out, replaced, and the old piece is treated with reverence, often buried.
That really shows the level of respect.
Immense respect. Completing a new Torah scroll is a huge celebration for a community. And it's considered a mitzvah, a commandment for every Jewish man to either write or commission a Torah scroll in his lifetime. Often at the completion ceremony, people get the honor of inking in one of the final letters.
And where are these precious scrolls kept?
They're housed in the Ark, the Aron Kodesh, usually on the eastern wall of the synagogue, facing Jerusalem, the holiest spot.
And they're often decorated.
Oh, yes, beautifully. With Keilah Kodesh, sacred vessels, maybe a cloth binder, wimple, an embroidered cover, the mantle, a silver breastplate, ornate wooden or ivory handles, its Ayim tree of life, and often a silver crown on top, sometimes with little bells that jingle when it's carried.
It sounds beautiful.
Bringing a new Torah scroll into a synagogue, Hachnosa's Sefer Torah, is this incredibly joyous event. Processions, dancing, singing, a feast. It really shows the community's connection.
Beyond Judaism, the Torah's influence spread through translation, didn't it?
Absolutely. Way back, as Aramaic became common, you had Aramaic translations, Targums, emerging maybe as early as the 6th century BCE.
To make it understood.
Exactly. Then a huge one was the Septuagint, the Greek translation, started in Alexandria in the 3rd century BCE, hugely important for spreading Jewish ideas and later used by early Christians.
And then Latin, Arabic.
Yep. The Latin Vulgate, which became standard for the Catholic Church, and Arabic translations, the Torah is the Torah in Islam. Jewish scholars like Saadia Gan even wrote major works on it in Arabic, and now, of course, countless modern translations.
Now, let's circle back to that article from the Society for Humanistic Judaism, Torah as Myth. It offers a really different way to engage if you don't take it as literal truth. They talk about 2 great mistakes. Can you unpack those?
Sure. The author, Rabbi Cohen, argues the first big mistake is insisting the Torah is literally historically true. He points to things like, well, lack of archaeological evidence for many events, the supernatural stories, parallels with other ancient myths.
Right.
He suggests it's more likely a collection of ancient myths, legends, teachings, rather than history as we think of it. And the problem with insisting on literal truth, he argues, is it forces you to grapple with parts that many modern people find ethically difficult. Things concerning, say, homosexuality, the role of women, slavery. Now, Jewish law has evolved on many of these, but Rabbi Cohen's point is if you believe it's literally God's unchanging word, it's much harder to challenge or move beyond those problematic norms.
He mentioned modern Israel, too.
Yeah, highlighting how these tensions play out in debates there, Shabbat transport, same-sex marriage, interfaith marriage, the clash between applying ancient religious law literally in a modern democratic state.
Okay, so mistake, #1. Clinging to literalism leads to ethical and societal problems. What's the second great mistake?
The second mistake, maybe more aimed at liberal Jews, he suggests, is dismissing the Torah entirely because it's just myth, saying it's irrelevant, not worth engaging with.
Throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Kind of, yeah. He argues that even if it's not literal history or divinely dictated, it's still this incredibly rich source. Insights into being human, enduring moral lessons, connection to Jewish history and culture.
Use an analogy, Pandora's box.
Right. You don't have to believe Pandora was real to get the message about hope surviving amidst suffering. Similarly, he says, the Torah, even for atheists or agnostics, offers valuable ethical reflection, cultural understanding, historical context. Think about the creation story and Shabbat, whether you believe God rested or not, the idea of dedicated rest. Still powerful.
So it's about finding meaning within the stories, even if viewed metaphorically.
Yeah.
Engaging thoughtfully, not just accepting blindly or rejecting completely.
Exactly. The humanistic perspective encourages this critical but appreciative engagement. Acknowledge the context, the difficult parts, but also appreciate the wisdom, the cultural impact. And importantly, draw ethics from the whole Jewish experience, not solely the Torah.
This has been, wow, a really enlightening deep dive. We've covered so much, the different names, the stories in each book, the authorship debates, its role in ritual and law, the amazing craft of the scroll itself, and these really different ways of looking at it.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how this one collection of ancient texts is just so multifaceted. It's sacred scripture for millions, a legal foundation, and for others, a source of myth, ethical challenge, cultural identity. The layers written, oral, the devotion, the scroll making, the ongoing debates, it all speaks to its enduring power.
And for everyone listening, we really hope this deep dive gave you that solid, accessible overview you were looking for.
Yeah.
Respecting your time, but hopefully satisfying that curiosity without just drowning you in detail.
Mm-hmm. Which brings us maybe to a final thought for you to chew on. Given all these different ways of seeing the Torah divine law, history, myth, what aspects do you find most compelling? How might this ancient text still speak to our understanding of history, ethics, identity today?
Or maybe, put another way, If we do read the stories as powerful myths rather than literal history, what new kinds of meaning, what relevance might emerge for us right now? Definitely something to reflect on.